Welcome to Passive Investors Playbook. I'm your host, Charlie Hardage. In each episode, we'll sit down with successful people that turn to real estate to build and grow their wealth. We do a deep dive into why they chose real estate and what makes it so attractive to them. We explore why people in their industry could also benefit from passively investing in real estate. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced investor, a doctor or a professional athlete, love your job or hate your job, our show is here to help you build a profitable real estate portfolio while maximizing your free time and minimizing stress. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn from some of the best in the business. Welcome to Passive Investors Playbook. All right, so I got to interview someone who has an amazing story. He came from Germany and was in the German Air Forces, came to the United States and joined the US Air Force for a while. He is helping other people get into real estate passively. What's really cool about Axel Meierhoefer's story is that he's helping other people invest in real estate. He doesn't actually focus on apartments like most of the other guests, but he focuses on smaller multifamily properties like fourplexes, things like that. And you can do it passively. He also has a really cool coaching program where he mentors people to do this themselves. There's tons of awesome content in this episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the Passive Investors Playbook Show. I'm the host, Charlie Hardage. Today, I have Axel Meierhoefer, the CEO of Ideal Wealth Grower. He is also the host of the Ideal Investor Show, a podcast created to help others be financially free through passive income. Axel spent 22 years in the Air Force as a fighter pilot and instructor, serving in both the German Air Force and the United States Air Force. After the Air Force, he was an executive for an IT company. Along the way, Axel learned about real estate investing and is now experiencing financial freedom. Axel uses his time to teach people about residential, turnkey, and international real estate investing through his podcast, mentoring, and free consultations. Axel, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, hi, Charlie. Thanks for having me. Well, you put most of the things already in the intro. One of the things, this mentoring part is really what is mainly occupying me, and it's really satisfying to kind of help people to follow down the similar path that I was able to go down, getting access to the network that I've developed, and maybe to some extent help them, what I call, help them to become basically the creator of their own future and the boss of their own empire. And not just from a title or something like in a job, but really in the full meaning of those terms.
I love that. Boss of their own empire. I love that term, Axel. It's funny because in real estate, you can do that, right? It's a lot of small businesses that, one person business maybe, or a very small company, but you can be the boss of your empire. Real estate has a lot of different benefits. And I'm really excited to have you on the show because you have a different perspective than most of my guests, and definitely want to dig into that a bit and what the company does. But want to take a step back first. I know you were born in Germany. You came over to the United States to continue your military service with the US Air Force. You were a fighter pilot, which is amazing. Very cool. And then also an instructor. But in that, I didn't hear anything about real estate. So how did you get into real estate?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to address that. The first one is obviously, and anybody who has ever done any kind of military service for a longer period of time, like a really longer commission, like I had 20 plus years, you typically, especially if you're reasonably career oriented, you're moving around, right? Like, and not so much by your own choice, you're being moved around by your different assignments. That is what happened to us, to my family and myself, both for Germany and for the US. And each time you get to a new location, just in general terms, regardless of an investment approach, you have the choice typically to, do you want to live in base housing? Do you want to live outside the base? And if this choice is, which for us was pretty much always outside the base, was, do you want to live as a tenant or do you want to live as an owner? Right. And so my last assignment base was kind of like a combination job between the US Air Force and the German Air Force to bring a flight training center to a base in New Mexico and bring a lot of people from Germany over and so forth. And so for us initially, it was, okay, we want to be owners. And we had a really, really nice house built for us in that community. But then when it became clear that all these people would come over and they needed housing, and a lot of them, especially the Germans, weren't even eligible to live on base. So for them, the question was, okay, how many of them would want to be owners? And very, very few did. But to be tenants, they obviously, and this is a community at the time had about 25, 30,000 people. So they weren't prepared for several hundred people coming in, you know, so new housing needed to be built. And it was pretty clear the government would basically cover most of the rent. So it introduced me to this idea, okay, so if I were to own one of the properties that are being built, and then I could rent it out to any of my fellow German military members, and the government would basically be 100%. It's better than Section 8, basically, you know, direct pay from the government is basically not really any risk, right? And so that kind of was the first introduction, how this could work. There are some anecdotes that, you know, taught me how little I knew when I just looked at this could fundamentally be a good thing and not really knowing much. And like many people that talk about or have gotten into real estate and in some form of a profession will tell you that the first few years were probably the worst, partially because of lack of knowledge and partially because, you know, we just did it without really learning about it first. So I did the same thing. I did it, had some not so nice lessons to learn, and then really started digging in. And so after the military career, I got into it in earnest, but with much more knowledge. And that's where we kind of fast forward 15, 20 years later. And now I feel that I've reached a point in the last few years where I can actually help other people avoid those mistakes that I had to make myself.
Yeah, I love that story, and you're right. So in the military, I don't know how the German military works, but I was in the United States Army, and most people moved around every 3 to 5 years. You know, and most people also rented, or maybe they would buy a house, but they would sell it and then move to a new duty station, buy another property, or rent there. And so when you came over to the States, you noticed that there's a lot of other Germans that weren't either eligible to buy a home or didn't want to. They just wanted to rent. A lot of times military do rent because it's a lot easier. You don't want to move your whole, you know, garage and your whole house every time you go to a new duty station. So
yeah, I mean, I actually have to say now I'm advising people in the military, especially if they still have quite a bit of their career ahead of them, to do what I did, but with a mentor like myself or somebody that has the knowledge. Because if you really think about it, there is no better deal. And if anybody in your audience is in the military or has friends in the military, think about this just for a second. Now, it didn't apply to me because obviously as a German military member, I wasn't eligible for some of the things, even though I served in the US military, but that doesn't mean you get the whole gambit of all the benefits. But for anybody listening who is currently serving in the military, my advice would be, for one, become aware of the fact that you are eligible for a VA loan, which means you can buy something without any money down. Typically, in most cases, you have to stay in that property or own that property for 2 years, which is, like you just said, Charlie, this is not unusual. If you buy a property with a VA loan in your next service station or your current service station, you pay nothing down and you stay in it and you pay the mortgage and you stay 2, 3, 4 years, and then you get PCS to another place. Now you rent it. Next place you get to, you do another VA loan, 0 down, so still no money of your own. You live there again for 2, 3, 4 years, rent it. So depending on how long your military career or assignment is going to last, and how far you're already into it, I'm actually advising people there will be very rarely any other opportunities where you get a really competitive interest rate for 0 down in the future. And so while you're still in the service, it's an ideal time every 2, 3, 4 years when you get PCS to basically get assets for free in a sense.
Yep.
Now, the thing is, the big lesson, without going too deep, is, and that's why I'm inviting anybody. I'm always happy to have these conversations, and we can have 1 or 2 free conversations initially, where what you want to do is, as soon as you're leaving, to your next assignment, or in the last year when you get kind of announced, okay, in 6 months, 9 months or so, you're going to get your new assignment, that you start looking who is and has and runs the best property management organization in the area, in that location, and just let them manage it for you. Right. So if you take that and you say, okay, somebody has another 6, 8, 10 years of their career ahead of them, they could easily end up with 3 or 4 properties rented, running, generating cash flow, at least break even. Most of the time, they would probably do a little cash flow. But they will never get worse, right? Versus comparing this to the more traditional clients that we are working with, where they're working in a job, they have maybe some savings, they want to get into real estate, they want to generate passive income, and nobody is going to give them zero down, right? So on investment property, the traditional is for a single family, 20% down, for duplex, triplex, stuff like that, 25% down most of the time. Compare that to zero, right? So anybody in a government job that is moving you around, or military or anything like that, I can only highly recommend start taking advantage of the VA opportunity from a down payment perspective as early as possible. Start tomorrow if you can.
Yeah. I love that advice. And I think a lot of military members think you can only use the VA loan once, and that's not true.
No, you can use it every 2 years.
Yeah, there are some stipulations with it. However, you can do it a lot more than one time. If you
get PCS unless it changed recently, but from what I know, if you PCS, you can use it again.
Yeah.
Right.
So VA loan is definitely a phenomenal avenue. If you can do it, because it's great. And then you also mentioned something that I wanted to touch on, is government covers most of the rent for, and you were specifically talking about the German soldiers, but just in general, military get what's called BAH, or that's what it's called in the Army, basic allowance for housing. And
exactly.
They instead of living on base, they'll provide money that's guaranteed every single month, guaranteed. And obviously government jobs are pretty stable. Military, you're in a contract, and so you don't really get to go where you want. You go where you're told. And so we actually do have a single family rental near a military base. It's done extremely well, never been late, because that rent is always just coming in. So
it gets even better if you want to, and I recommend again on you wanting to, if you're listening and you're in the military or government job, and you get one of those properties, like for example with a VA loan. And I have to say, I moved around a few times within the US military. Every base had a base or a military or the service, like Air Force, Army, whatever service it was, housing organization within that base community, right? And so one thing you can do is you can basically approach the base housing organization and say, okay, I'm an owner. You can do this just before your PCS. You could theoretically do this at any time, but if you know, okay, I'm leaving in 6 months or so, you can go to them and say, okay, I have property management secured. I want my house to be on your list of available properties for people. And you can even go as far as saying, okay, I want certain rank levels, or I only want officers, or like whatever, people that are eligible. And you can find out what the government limit is. Mm-hmm. And see if the limit, because there is a certain limit, right? Like if somebody says, okay, I have a large family, I want to have like a 5-bedroom, 4-bath house at the golf course, you're not going to get the maximum rent that would be potentially adequate. You get whatever is reasonable for your rank level, family size, and location. So there could be a delta, but you can find out from the housing unit or from the housing organization on the base how much for the different kinds of people and size of property you have, are you actually eligible for, and then see if that number per month fits with what you would get on the open market, because ultimately you can make the job of property management even easier by saying, okay, the housing organization on the base is going to feed you the tenants.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is that when you do that, that as property management, and ultimately if for some reason they can't get through as the owner, you can always go back to them and say, hey, one of the fill in the blanks service members that is renting my property and you're paying for is not treating it properly.
Yeah.
And nobody, I mean, I don't know anybody in the service who actually wants to get called to their boss and say, okay, we got a message from housing that you are like, you know, I don't know, fill in the blanks word.
Yeah.
Kind of person treating somebody else's. And especially, I mean, keep in mind, if you are, even if you retire, like in my case, right, I'm still getting addressed by rank and stuff like that, right? Now, there's a little difference when you have been a little higher in the food chain, but still fundamentally, you know, if you work with base housing, your property management, and your own kind of like your role as the owner, that's about as secure and as dependable, and there's probably never a vacancy, because obviously the person that lives in the house gets 6 months notice for PCS. Housing knows they will be asked by property management to go to housing and say, announce that you're going to PCS, and they're going to start looking who is the next person, right? I mean, it's a beautiful, most amazing setup you can get.
Yeah, I love that, and we invested in a single family close to Fort Campbell, and it's done really, really well. We actually just got a notice a couple days ago that they're moving out. So, and that's fine, because there's Fort Campbell's the biggest base, I believe, in the United States. So a lot of people moving in, they were never late on their rent, took care of the property. So
no, exactly. And base housing will actually make sure that you have an additional layer of security if ever there were something going wrong. But it's also, you know, before we started recording, we spoke a little bit about mindset. It's not just the mindset of the investor. It's also, you know, as a military member, when you know that base housing, property management, and another member of the military is kind of like that triangle that is providing housing to you and your family. I have never met anybody in the military in different services that I've met over this long career that didn't have the awareness and consciousness that, you know, you have to treat it properly, if for no other reason than you don't want to screw up your performance review.
Right, exactly. Okay, Axel, you've been really successful with your career. You're in the Air Force for 22 years. You're an IT executive for a number of years. You have a consulting company. Why real estate? Like, what attracts you to real estate?
Well, there are so many answers to that question. The first thing, and that's what I always said, is kind of like the story. I dabbled a little bit in my during my last assignment, like we touched on earlier. But then when I got out in 2002, anybody who can recall back to that knows that that was the time when the dot-com bubble burst. Because I was starting, when I got this job in the IT world, I was thinking, okay, well, I get a little bit of a military pension, but that would never be enough to fully retire on. So what else can I do? And I felt, you know, at the time, I didn't really have another 30 or 40-year career ahead of me. So I needed to find something. And, you know, normally, I guess most people in working with me in that company and other companies would say, well, I have my 401k. But when I looked into it, I realized now I have a really radical view on it. But even at the time, I thought, okay, well, this is mainly stock and mutual fund investing. And the market just basically completely collapsed, right? I don't want to be involved in that. Now, had I been really into stocks, I should have maybe realized, okay, after the full collapse of 50 or 60% might have been the best time to get in. Right. But to me, it was more, okay, I don't want to be invested or get involved in something that is, you know, potentially completely collapsing again in 10 years or so. So then the question was, what else can I do? And I started looking around, who are other people that kind of changed careers, were immigrants, so to speak, or green card holders and stuff. And funny enough, I came across a rumor that I then dug into, And it has to do with the Terminator, because he's Austrian. He came over as a bodybuilder and then got into movie making. But one of the things was that he looked into what can I do with the money, because there was no way to consume the money. And he, even in the early stages when nobody knew him yet as a movie person, even before Conan, so to speak, he started investing in real estate. Became ultimately one of the biggest residential and to some extent even commercial real estate owners in California, and still does, right? So I was looking into this a little bit because I couldn't believe the rumor, to be honest. And it turned out to be true, and the reasoning made total sense. So from the relatively negative experience with that first investment, I had done a lot of research, and part of that research revealed that why would it make sense? What is the government doing? You know, how does the government support real estate investors? And so that basically led me to say, okay, well, that's a similar situation, even though I had nowhere near these millions and millions of dollars, but the principle, the approach, the idea, and why to do it and how to do it made sense to me. And what really, really resonated was that not only Arnold, but other people who did it too, all said, I'm not just doing it to place my money somewhere, but most of them said, I'm doing it to basically create a legacy or an estate or something like that for the long term. That's not just serving me. I mean, the guy has four kids, right? But it's going to serve the family. They will never really be in a situation like where he came from and where I kind of came from a very, you know, lower middle class, average working class family. You know, that would always be traditionally required to have a job, and then hope that the government would give you enough money so you can retire, right? And that notion that, okay, I want to have something that is independent of inflation, is independent of any kind of stuff, is one of the most fundamental things. If we lose privacy laws, where the government comes in and says, okay, you're not allowed to own that anymore, then I think we have much bigger problems. But that's so unlikely in my view that, you know, shelter is so basic. Everybody will need shelter. The government is probably the last thing they would be willing or even call it democracy if you don't have privacy and ownership rules anymore. So that's very unlikely to ever go away. So now, with that being said, it allows to really build a legacy, really build generational wealth. And when you go a little deeper, and I know you're familiar with real estate, there are so many things that don't apply. You know, if you had a 401k, it's not that easy to get, you know, 80% loan on that. Right. Well, if you own real estate, you know, you can get a home equity line of credit, or if you want to buy something new, you only have to put 20% in as an investor if you don't have that military stuff, and get 80% from the bank, but you get 100% of the profits. You know, in almost every other investment type, that just doesn't exist. And then on top of it, the government says, you know, we can do all the housing for the whole population ourselves. So we, over the next 27 and a half years, you can write this thing off as if it were a machine. And in reality, 27 and a half years later, the thing is probably 2 or 2.5 times more expensive or valuable than what you paid for. But on the books, it's zero. Right. All this kind of stuff is just, you know, when you dig into it, it's just amazing.
Axel, I love that story. What's interesting to me, I know you said that you came across the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and most people don't know, but he owned, I think, when he was bodybuilding, he put his cash into a small apartment complex. I think it was like 12 units, 16 units, something like that. It was a small apartment complex, and that allowed him to get some additional income while he was working out all the time. So that's I love that story. And then you also mentioned some other reasons when you dug into Arnold's reasoning. There's a lot of government support, and that doesn't necessarily mean financial support, but just a lot of government involvement with housing, a lot of support there. You like the smaller single family and smaller multifamily up to 4 units, because there's lots of shelter. It creates shelter, which is a basic human need. You wanted to create a legacy for your family, provide generational wealth. My favorite benefit of real estate is the leverage component. You only have to put a small percent down, and you're eligible for 100% of the increase, right? You don't have to split that with the lender. And then the last thing, which I think is very underrated, is depreciation. In depreciation, it's just a paper loss, but to your point, Axel, the property is going to go up in 27 years. It's going to go up 2-3x. However, the bricks and the physical pieces of that, they do get wear and tear, and so the government does allow you to write off some of that depreciation every year for 27 years. So love that reasoning there. I think there's a lot more benefits of real estate, and you covered some phenomenal ones that I just love. I know, and earlier we talked about the VA loan a little bit, and it's my understanding that you were not eligible for the VA loan, or at least from the United States VA loan. I don't know if Germany has something, but how did you come up with the capital for those first few properties? Was that just from your Air Force service paycheck, or were there any other ways that you came up with the capital?
Yeah, so the eligibility with the VA loan, I actually tried because I had the minimum number of years, but because of my status, it was ultimately denied. And to answer your question, what the German government has when you are owner-occupant is a support program that is kind of similar like a VA loan. It's basically a 0 down 10-year loan with a very low or almost no interest rate. So that's what I was able to basically get. I was saying, okay, I'm buying this house for me, even though it's in the United States. Can you basically allow me to get the down payment, so to speak? And I paid that down, 0 interest, 10-year loan. It didn't take me 10 years, but that's the setup that the German government had. So it's not a 30-year 0 down, low interest. It's a 10-year 0 down, but also 0 interest. So
Wow.
So that was basically the way to get started, by using that money. But it only works. You can't get money for investment properties, but I could get it for our own property, the first one. And that obviously allowed then to have much less pay, for payment for mortgage, because we still needed a mortgage. It wasn't enough. Obviously it was like, I think 40,000 or something like that. But then the mortgage payment was relatively low, and it gave us equity over time to buy that first rental and then keep going from there.
That sounds like a great program. So that program is you got a 10-year loan, 0 down, 0% interest, but that was just for the down payment.
Well, it was basically in support of purchasing a home, right? So like I mentioned, that first house was built for 185,000 in New Mexico. I mean, people will say, why is that still possible for a new house? Well, it was built in 1996 or 7, so it's quite a while ago. At that time, that was a competitive price for a new house in that particular location, and we got $40,000 from the government. So the mortgage was obviously much slower and smaller. Interest rates were actually not that far different than they are today. I mean, at the time we thought they were normal. Today we find them outrageous, but at the time that was considered pretty normal. And so that's how we got started. And the property immediately had basically that 40,000 of equity, because from the US perspective, that wasn't money that they were aware of. They basically looked at it as if we just put 40,000 in wherever it came from. Right?
Yeah. That sounds really, really good. It's 185. When you said 185,000, I was thinking, wow, that is inexpensive. But that was also 26 years ago.
And it was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house to the 2,300 square feet on a 6,000 square foot lot at the golf course, right? Like, I mean, nowadays that thing would be probably like 350 or 400 or something.
Gotcha. So Axel, I want to kind of ask about your company. I know we brought up the podcast a little bit, want to talk about the company, and you've mentioned it a little bit, but do you mind maybe talking about the company, what your company does, and how you're helping people that want to be passive investors?
Yeah, absolutely. So the company is called Idea Wealth Grower, and what we really do is a little bit an outflow or an outcome from my own experience. Now, you and I just touched a little bit about that time during the military, but when you mentioned in your intro that I became an executive in an IT company that wasn't in New Mexico, that IT company was in Santa Barbara, California. And anybody who hears that knows or can imagine that's a pretty expensive area, right? So we were able, because of the stuff we just discussed, to actually get a house there in the very traditional way with low, like we were officially first-time home buyers, because we had never really done anything in the FHA markets and stuff.
Sure.
So we were able to get our own house there. But when I started looking around, following this example, Arnold, California, residential real estate, and I looked at the numbers and I just couldn't make it work. For one, no way I couldn't imagine how I could get enough money for down payment and how I could get enough money for rent to have a good, what I call performance ratio. And anybody who has listened to anything in real estate investing, at least for renovated properties, you're looking for like what's called the 1% rule. So let's say you buy $180,000, $200,000 property, then you want to get between $1,800 and $2,000 in rent, ideally. It's not always easy and the markets fluctuate and stuff, but that's kind of the point. In anywhere in California, you can't get that. You get a property for 6, 7, 800,000, and then you get maybe 3,500 or 4,000 rent if you're lucky. So it's not 1%. It's like much closer to 0.4 or 0.5%, right?
Okay.
And so that's when I said, okay, how can I overcome this? And the way to overcome it for me was to look throughout the country and say, is there a way where I can make these investments at a much lower, how would I say, like purchase price situation, and get this kind of performance ratio? And what I found is there are markets in the Midwest, for example, where that exists. The problem is how you be 1,000 or 2,000 or however many miles away.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be really an opportunity for oversight, right? I would basically own the property, but how do we handle it? And so that's why I discovered turnkey providers. And just for your audience, in a nutshell, turnkey provider is an organization that, what I always call, finds the ugly duckling in a good neighborhood, renovates it, looks what the market rate or market value of that house is in that area, and offers it to an investor. And importantly, and not all of them do it, but the ones we use do it, is they also manage the property that they sold to us. So because of that, they know exactly what they did to it. They know it from the very moment that they bought it. They know what things they put in and what things were already there. And obviously, if they want to have a long-term relationship with somebody like me, who now has 10 properties, not always the same organization, obviously, there is an incentive for them to treat me and what I call our tribe members at Ideal Wealth Grower appropriate and well. So I basically did this all on my own, did all the research and decided, okay, I'm going to try this turnkey investing in well-performing areas around the country. And then over that time, when friends and colleagues and stuff asked me what I'm doing, I told them about it, and more encouraged me to say, hey, this is so cool. I never knew this is even possible. You should basically help other people do the same thing. And that's how Ideal Wealth Grower was born. And so the mentoring now is, for one, I'm educating people who want to do this journey, follow basically what I'm doing, taking similar steps, buying in the same areas. I'm also helping them to create their estate. You're starting out with an LLC that they use to run their operations. That's why I say the boss of their own empire, starting with, having an LLC like the Charlie Empire LLC, for example, and that would be the one where all your rents are collected as you start adding more and more properties, and where you have your laptop that you need to engage with your property managers and all that good stuff. So that's the one part. I'm basically setting you up to become the boss of your own empire, while I'm also making you or referring you to my own network, meaning like insurance providers, lenders, banks, turnkey providers, all the different organizations that you would need. And that's going back to this point about boss of your own empire, right? You really see yourself as the boss in the sense of, I'm the founder owner of a company. Very few, you will find almost none, that when they really build a business or practice, do everything themselves.
Right.
Success in that context is basically mostly defined by you hire the right people, ideally the best people for the different things that you need so your business can be successful. Now, when I say hire, I don't mean this literally as a W-2 job, but you're hiring property management, you're hiring a bank, you're hiring an insurance provider, you're hiring a mentor like me, you're hiring these different people so they can basically do the jobs that they are the experts in, and you overseeing the whole thing, like a boss or owner or founder of a business, right? And if you want to, after you grow your portfolio to a certain size, you can even go as far as turning it into a trust. Right? There are legal and other benefits long term that you can do in this idea of legacy building. But fundamentally, that's kind of that component. And then on the practical side, the mentoring is really, there's a lot to learn. And I'm saying that very unashamed. I have decided for myself, because of the track record, but also going forward for anybody who is interested in Idea Wealth Grow and what we do there, to really specialize and focus on residential real estate 1 to 4 unit properties. And for me, I might be a little, simple-minded or stuff, but there are many layers to that onion alone, right? And I want to know all them, or at least as many as I can. I know there are others who have education programs who say, okay, first I teach you single family, and then I teach you apartment, and then I teach you commercial, and then I teach you storage unit, and then I teach you syndication and stuff. That's all great. What I'm missing in that, and I'm not bashing anybody, everybody has to do their business the way they want to. But to me, there is the theory, learning about something, and then applying it, executing it, actually taking action. And so we do both. The mentoring at Idea Wealth Grow is always a combination of educating you for where you are in your journey to the time freedom point, and then also find as quickly as possible opportunities to take action, to set up your LLC, to find your first property, to set you up with all the relationships that I have groomed so they treat you as if it were me, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's 50-50, but it's, here's the action, here's the theory, let's do it together and in parallel.
I love that. So I just want to recap that a little bit. So your company, Ideal Wealth Grower, you basically realized earlier in your career that California didn't fit that 1% rule, and that 1% is the purchase price of the property. 1% of that, you need to get at least 1% of that every month in rent, and California didn't fit that bill. And so what you decided to do is look elsewhere. Midwest is typically pretty affordable, and they do have a lot of rentals that hit that 1% rule criteria that you're looking for. Unfortunately, the downside of that is it's a couple thousand miles away. And so what you did is look for some turnkey providers. Some turnkey providers basically mean you invest, it's your home, but they kind of run everything for you. It's more of it's not just a property manager. There's a lot more into it that goes into it, like sometimes rehabbing the property, or well, even before that, finding the property, buying the property, rehabbing it, and then once it's rehabbed, managing the property. So there's a lot that goes into that turnkey.
Yeah, and I want to just interject. Part of the reason was at the time, as you mentioned, I was working as an executive in a software company. So I was like 60 hours a week occupied with that. And most of the people nowadays that come to us for that mentorship and for working to build this portfolio, they are employees too, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully having good jobs, or maybe, if it's a couple, both having good jobs. They're not really looking for another job, even though I say they're the boss of the empire, but that's why you hire everything out.
Right.
So you can have it as passive as possible, and you only really have a month or so call with your property management to find out how did it go, did the tenants pay, were there any repairs or stuff like that. And those calls are like half an hour or so. Yeah. Right. And the rest, like you said very nicely, it's basically the people that you hire are experts in their field, and that's why they know what they need to do and don't need you to micromanage them and oversee them all the time. Once a month for half an hour should be enough.
Yeah. I love that. I think what's really cool about your story is you were doing this, the turnkey, you kind of discovered all this on your own. And there was I'm sure a lot of difficulties, especially being 1,500, 2,000 miles away. And as you were talking to friends and family, they loved it. They wanted help, and then they said, "Hey, Axel, you should do this for other people too." And so you kind of started a business, and maybe didn't even think about it that way. You were building your own empire, and now you're still building your own empire, but helping others build their empire. And so I love that. And something else you said, which really resonated with me, Axel, is there's a learning component, then execution and taking action. And that was the issue that I had when I first started. I was 99% focused on the learning component, and you said 50-50. So you also brought up the word mindset earlier. I kind of want to dig into that a little bit. What about the mindset maybe was different with you about learning then taking action, as opposed to learning and maybe being a little scared to take action?
So the mindset point is that we are being led to believe that only a part of certain people can do it. Only people who are already very, very affluent or so forth can do this kind of stuff. And what my mission is, and what I'm trying to get people to realize is, if you're willing to accept help from somebody who has already done the things, and when somebody says, "Hey, I would be interested in your mentoring, but I don't really know if it's for me," that's why I say, let's do 1 or 2 calls, so I can show you what I do and how I do it, not just in the theory, but I can literally show you the properties, show you a little bit how this works, show you the numbers, and then you can decide, okay, yeah, this could work for me if somebody is willing to hold my hand.
Yeah.
Right. And that mindset to say, okay, in the mindset manual, I'm actually describing a spectrum that starts on the one end with victimhood, and on the other hand, the creator of your own future. And when you download this, you can go to ideawealthgrower.com/free and download it. What the first few exercises are just to find out, where are you on that spectrum? And many people realize they might not be in total victimhood, but quite close to something that is, what can I do? My boss tells me what to do, the government tells me what to do, the tax agency tells me what to do, the IRS tells me what to do, the media tells me what to do. I'm basically just directed on what I'm supposed to do to stay out of trouble. And what I want to get you to is to adopt the mindset to say, you're not just somebody who is like a marionette that is kind of driven by some strings attached to your head. It's a matter of what you really want to accomplish, and somebody helping you to see the path on how to accomplish those goals. Right? If somebody says, okay, I find I should have, or I need $5,000 to cover all my expenses, my life, take a vacation, pay for my car and stuff per month. Well, then we can come together and I can help you get to that point where your passive income is $5,000. And that's why we call it the time freedom point, where you really have the freedom to decide, how much do I still want to work? Or do I want to live my passion even if it doesn't make any money, because I know those $5,000 or whatever your number is coming in. But the first thing is to say, how can I help you change your mindset from whatever level of victimhood to really believing I can create my future? Yes, I have to follow the rules and all that stuff, but there is a lot of freedom and opportunity there. And it makes a massive, massive difference when you start believing in yourself and the help that you are willing to adopt and accept. Right. And so that's basically always been my offer. Right. I'm doing the mentoring. Yes, there's a fee associated with it that people can find on the website. But the main part is I really want people to see that this path that I went down and others went down is available to them as well. Right. And the last thing I want to say about this, any of these kind of legacy building kind of things are not overnight. Right. That's the part that I'm struggling with from a business development perspective, that people are constantly being told, oh, this was good last year. Now this year this is good. Next year, that thing is good. And you're switching and jumping around like crazy. In real estate investing, especially when you build a legacy, you need to be willing to put 8 to 10 years of consistent, supported work in. And I don't mean work in like the traditional W-2 sense, but working together like you and I talking, or somebody being in a mentoring session every other week. And over time, you get more and more knowledgeable. You start accumulating assets. You start getting some passive income in. And if you do this for 8 to 10 years, and then you don't have to have sessions every 2 weeks for 8 to 10 years, but maybe for the first year or two, and then you will become confident enough to say, okay, now I just do rinse and repeat until I reach the size of my portfolio that gives me that passive income that I want to get. And you get more and more and more independent, more and more really creative in the sense of what do you want for your life, for your family, for your legacy, all that kind of stuff. And I'm working as much on helping people to adopt the mindset of creating your own future, as well as adopting the mindset of having some patience to let things actually evolve. And I last point on that is to basically point out, if you had to learn to be ready for the world, they said you had to go to school for 12 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
When they then said, okay, now let's make you ready for the work life, you had to probably add another 10 years. Right. So I'm saying to get to that kind of life that you probably envision to have, where you're not directed by others, put in 8 to 10 years like you have before, and then it's totally up to you what you want to do from there.
Yeah, I love that. And so people can download that mindset menu at idealwealthgrower.com/free. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
We'll put that in the show notes as well. Man, I love that, because I needed a lot of help with my mindset, and it's been evolving over the last few years and changing and growing. But I always wanted to be my own boss and have my own empire. I just didn't know how to do it. And so I think your mentoring program is phenomenal, where it puts your students or your customers, clients, in the driver's seat, right? And it's not going to happen overnight, like you said, but it's going to be a slow process, but it'll be a process to change the mindset and let people escape their W-2 and probably work only a few hours a week, and if they have the teams in place, maybe not even that much, but get that passive income. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the work is actually not really work in the traditional sense. It's just curiosity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm spending several hours a week voluntarily just to look at the different investments we have and how they're doing and what might be the next thing to add to the portfolio. Not because we have to, but because it's just fun.
Awesome. So, and I know we have a few minutes left in the interview. What's a recent book that stands out to you that, real estate, business, self-help related?
Okay, that's a little different than just any book. Real estate related, for what we discussed, I would say, and it's not a very recent book, it's called The Turnkey Revolution by Chris Closure. Another one that is kind of related, a little bit bigger picture, is called The Wealthy Gardener by John Soforic. And another one that is really geopolitics, if anybody in the audience is interested, is a book by an ambassador of Singapore by the title is Has China Won?
Very cool.
So you can decide which level of picture you want to jump into.
Sounds good. What can people expect to see from you and your business over the next few years?
Well, we want to attract more people that like to have this kind of guidance and hand-holding to build their portfolios. And we're working on basically making more of the information available. I'm kind of still in my mind thinking there should at some point be a book called The Ideal Wealth Grower. And John Soforic inspired me with his The Wealthy Gardener, because I picked it up because I like gardening. And then I realized it's actually an investing book, not a gardening book. But maybe there will be a book at some point in the future that says The Ideal Wealth Grower, where the different things we do are described, in more detail.
That's awesome. I love that you thought it was about gardening, ended up being about investing, and then maybe inspired you to write a book too one day. Very cool. All right, Axel, how can people reach you?
Well, like I said, idealwealthgrower.com. If you spend 3 minutes, you get invited to the newsletter and invited for a free call and stuff. Or if you want to directly contact me, it's just axel@idealwealthgrower.com. Okay,
perfect. Do you have any social media handles you wanna plug?
No, if somebody just puts Ideal Wealth Grower in as a term, it's individual words or as one string, you find us on all the social media and everywhere.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Well, Axel, thank you so much for being here. It's been really good talking to you. Most of my guests are multifamily on apartment experts, right? And I love when we spoke a few weeks ago. I love this 1 to 4 unit residential property. You know, it's still in the providing shelter realm, still real estate, and just kind of gives the maybe a little bit more work just because you're doing it yourself up front, but then in the long run, you can, as you said very well, you can build your own empire this way just by acquiring some turnkey properties. So thank you so much for being on the show.
No, absolutely. And maybe I can say one quick sentence why.
Yeah.
The point is the world of anything that has to do with like apartments or anything larger unit is really a commercial world. Mm-hmm. Right? And the reason that we stayed and I decided to stay in the 1 to 4 unit is because that's the world where all the people that want at any point get into home ownership also live. So when it ever comes to the point of who would be the potential buyer, if there were ever really an emergency and I had to get rid of one of my properties to get the money for, I don't know, medical or what have you, it's not just the professional commercial real estate people, but it's anybody who is looking for a house for their own occupancy as well as investing. And that is just the biggest market you can be in. That's the main reason.
Very cool. Love that. Well, thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Nice talking to you. Thank you for listening to today's show, brought to you by H&K Investment Group, your home for passive investing. If you want to learn more about how you can invest with us, please check out our website at hkigllc.com. Don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to our podcast. Please leave us a review to let us know how we are doing. Feel free to connect with me directly on LinkedIn or Facebook. As always, I'm your host, Charlie Hardage. Catch you next time.